"She's my priority now, Mom," Daniel said, eyes calm but final. I smiled, though something deep inside me went still. Priorities reveal what we fear losing most, and that night, I learned my place by its absence. If you've ever loved quietly, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. My name is Evelyn Hart. I am 61 years old, a retired nurse, and I live in a small brick house on the east side of Asheville, North Carolina. It's the same house where I raised my son, Daniel, after my husband Patrick passed away. Every corner of it holds a memory, a dent in the wall from Daniel's first indoor baseball swing, a faded mark on the kitchen floor where Patrick spilled varnish trying to fix the table. It isn't grand, but it's home, and it has stood with me through every season of my life. Daniel has always been my reason to keep moving. I still remember holding him for the first time, the way he grabbed my finger like he already knew he had my whole heart. When Patrick died, Daniel was 12. I worked double shifts at the county hospital and took online courses at night just to qualify for the nursing supervisor's pay. There were weeks when sleep came in fragments, but watching him walk across the stage years later to accept his architecture degree erased every ache. I thought then that my life story had been worth it. When Daniel met Megan, I was thrilled for him. She was young, energetic, and spoke with the kind of confidence that fills a room. She worked as an event planner, and she could make anything seem possible. I liked her at first because she laughed easily, and Daniel seemed lighter around her. At their wedding, she hugged me and said, "You raised a good man, Mrs. Hart. I'll take care of him," I remember answering. "Just love him honestly, that's all I ask." At the time, I believed she meant it. For a few years, everything was smooth. They lived downtown in a bright apartment full of glass and sunlight. I visited on weekends, cooked them Patrick's favorite stew, and helped plant herbs on their balcony. I never overstepped. I've always believed love grows best when it's given room to breathe. But after their third anniversary, the visits grew less frequent. Daniel started answering my calls with polite, distracted tones. "We're just busy, Mom," he'd say. "Megan's got a big event coming up." I understood. Life moves fast when you're young and building something. Still, I missed the small things, the way he used to call for advice about recipes, the way he'd drop by on Sundays to mow the lawn just to talk afterward. I filled the quiet with volunteering at a local health clinic and joining a book club. But even with those new circles, the silence between my son and me felt heavier each month. One evening, I found an old photo of Daniel and me on his first day of college. His face was full of hope, mine, of pride. I traced the edges of that photo and realized how love changes shape as it travels through time. What begins as protection becomes patience. What once needed words now needs silence. I told myself that distance didn't mean disconnection, that perhaps this was simply a new chapter of motherhood, one that required letting go without losing faith. I didn't know then that my son's love was about to be tested in a way neither of us expected. Sometimes, lessons arrive wrapped in the same tenderness that once kept us safe. When Daniel told me that she was his priority now, it wasn't cruelty, it was confusion, his and mine. What I did next wasn't about revenge. It was about reminding both of us what love truly costs and what it must never take. It started the way most shifts in family life do, not with an argument, but with a pause that lingered too long. Daniel began answering fewer of my messages. He used to call every Sunday at 7 sharp, then it became every other week, and eventually, only when Megan was out of town. I counted 18 unanswered texts and 3 canceled dinners over 2 months before I realized what was happening. I told myself not to take it personally. He was busy, successful, building his life. Still, something in my chest ached every time I saw his name light up my phone and then fade without a call back. The first time I noticed the change in his voice, we were having lunch downtown. Megan was late, so it was just the two of us. I reached for his hand and said, "You look tired, honey. Are you eating properly?" He smiled but didn't meet my eyes. "Megan says I work too much," he said. "She wants us to focus on each other more." I nodded, proud that he cared about his marriage, but something in his tone carried guilt. He changed the subject quickly, asking if I'd seen the new library renovations. When Megan arrived, her energy filled the room like perfume, pleasant at first, then overwhelming. She kissed Daniel's cheek, then glanced at me. "You ordered without us?" she said lightly. "We were just getting started," I said. She smiled in a way that wasn't quite a smile. The rest of the lunch was polite, but I could feel the undercurrent, her subtle corrections, his nervous laughs, my growing awareness that the balance had shifted. A few weeks later, I invited them for dinner. I cooked Patrick's favorite roast and set the table with the china we'd used at Daniel's graduation party. They arrived late. Megan explained they'd had to stop by her office. She looked tired, frustrated. During dinner, she spoke about her new client, a wealthy businessman, and how demanding he was. Daniel tried to join the conversation, but each time he spoke, she redirected it back to herself. I listened, patient as always, until she said, "You wouldn't understand, Evelyn. Our world moves fast." My fork paused midair. "Our world?" I repeated softly. She nodded. "The professional one. It's not like it used to be for your generation." Daniel reached for her hand, a small gesture that said more than words ever could. After dinner, while washing dishes, Daniel joined me in the kitchen. "Mom," he said carefully, "I know you're used to being part of everything, but Megan and I are trying to set our own boundaries. She feels like we need space." I looked at him, my only child, the boy whose scraped knees I'd once kissed better, now speaking like a man who had rehearsed his lines. I smiled. "Space is healthy," I said. "Just remember, love grows best with light, not walls." He nodded, relieved, and for a brief moment, I thought the conversation had softened the air between us. But a week later, he called again, his voice tight. "Mom, please don't drop by without calling first. Megan says it makes her anxious." I said I understood, even though I hadn't visited unannounced in months. The next call came a few days after. It was short, cold, and final. "She's my priority now, Mom," Daniel said. I stood by the kitchen sink, water running over my hands, staring at the window where Patrick's reflection used to appear in my memory. I wanted to ask Daniel if he understood what that word meant, priority. It's what I'd made him every day for 33 years, what I'd chosen over sleep, comfort, and sometimes hope. But I didn't say it. I simply replied, "Then I hope you treat her with the same care I treated you." After we hung up, I sat down and opened my old nursing journal. On the first blank page, I wrote, "Love doesn't vanish, it changes address." I didn't know why I wrote it, but it helped steady my breathing. That night, I made myself tea and went through old photos, looking for something that reminded me I had lived fully before being someone's mother. It was only later, when a letter arrived in the mail with Daniel's name and my address, that I realized the story wasn't about losing him. It was about learning the lesson every parent eventually faces: how to let go with grace while holding truth by the hand. The letter came on a Tuesday morning, tucked between a grocery flyer and a water bill. It looked official: white envelope, blue hospital logo in the corner, Daniel's name beneath my address. I assumed it was sent here by mistake and set it aside with the other mail. But later that night, while paying my own bills, curiosity nudged me. I opened it. Inside was a hospital invoice showing a series of lab tests, insurance notes, and a line at the bottom marked "Authorization, Evelyn M. Hart." My breath caught. I hadn't authorized anything since my retirement 2 years earlier. I stared at the page again. Someone had used my old insurance information. The next morning, I drove to the Mountain View Clinic to clear the matter. The waiting area smelled of disinfectant and coffee. A young billing clerk greeted me with a polite smile. "How can I help you today, ma'am?" I explained that I'd received a bill in my name but for my son's services. She looked up the record on her screen and said, "It shows authorization from your insurance file." I leaned closer. "That file was closed when I retired. Can you tell me who sent the request?" She hesitated, lowering her voice. "We received an email from a Megan Hart claiming to be your financial coordinator." For a moment, everything inside me went still. I asked if I could have a printed copy for my records. She glanced at her supervisor, who nodded. The printer hummed softly as she handed me the email printout and the billing statement, my first 2 truth props. I thanked her, signed the receipt, and walked back to my car in silence. On the drive home, I kept replaying what had happened. Megan had used my old insurance, something only Daniel or I should have had access to. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, but the precision of her wording, financial coordinator, felt deliberate. That night, I placed the papers in a folder and labeled it documents. I didn't know yet what I would do, only that I needed to understand before I spoke. The next few days revealed small confirmations. My online account for the insurance portal had been accessed 3 weeks earlier from a new device. When I checked with the provider, they confirmed the login came from an address in the same zip code as Daniel's office. I didn't accuse anyone. I simply noted the details. Years in nursing had taught me that before you act, you document. I decided to test the air before confronting anyone. When I called Daniel to ask about the bill, he sounded distracted. "Oh, that must be some mix-up. Megan handled all that. She said something about leftover coverage." I asked quietly, Did you know she used my name? He paused. She said it was still active. You don't mind, do you? His tone wasn't malicious, only tired. I felt a sadness settle, heavy but calm. No, I said. I just like knowing what's happening under my name. After the call, I opened a fresh page in my journal. I wrote the date, time, and his exact words. Then I added a single line beneath. Boundaries are best drawn before love erases them. A few days later, I drove to the clinic again to thank the billing clerk, Laura Jennings, for her help. She smiled knowingly. I'm glad you came back. The manager asked me to note that the account's been corrected. You're in the clear now. I nodded. Thank you. I appreciate your honesty. She lowered her voice. Between us, Mrs. Hart, this sort of thing happens more than you'd think. Family, trust, signatures, it's a messy combination. I smiled faintly. Yes, it is. When I returned home, I placed the documents beside my teacup and stared at them for a long while. My first instinct was to forgive quietly, as I always had. But something deeper whispered, this isn't about punishment, it's about teaching truth before life does it for you. That evening, I called an old friend from Patrick's days at the hospital, Marcus Leland, who had gone into law after leaving nursing administration. Marcus, I said, I need your advice on something delicate, he replied. Then bring the papers tomorrow. We'll look together. I slept little that night, but not from anger. My thoughts were clear, almost clinical. There are moments in life when love demands evidence, not emotion. This was one of them. By morning, my course was set. I didn't plan to confront anyone yet. I only wanted to be prepared for when the lesson would come due. Marcus Leland opened his office door with the same steady calm I remembered from our hospital days. His hair had gone gray at the edges, but his handshake was firm and kind. Evelyn Hart, he said, smiling. You still stand straighter than most lawyers I know. I laughed softly. Habit from years of double shifts. He motioned for me to sit, poured 2 cups of coffee, and waited while I unfolded my folder. I laid the email printout, billing statement, and my insurance notice on his desk. He read each page carefully, not rushing, making notes in the margin. When he looked up, his voice was calm but serious. Someone used your inactive insurance, signed your authorization, and misrepresented your financial control. That's fraud, Evelyn. I nodded. I thought so, but I didn't want to assume. He leaned back. Do you want to press charges? I shook my head. No, I want to understand, and I want to make sure it doesn't happen again. He smiled faintly. That's exactly why I liked working with nurses. You want solutions, not drama. He opened a drawer, pulled out a form, and said, We'll file a notice with your provider. They'll freeze access and flag future attempts. And I'll help you draft a letter, simple, factual, no emotion. I watched him type, the rhythm of his fingers steady. It reminded me of how I used to chart patient notes, methodical, detached, compassionate. As he worked, he asked gently, How's Daniel? I remember when he used to visit you at the hospital, carrying his little sketchbook. I smiled at the memory. He's doing well professionally. Personally, he's finding his way. Marcus glanced up. And Megan? I hesitated. She's smart, ambitious, and doesn't like uncertainty. I think she thought my presence was one. He nodded slowly. Power can make people forget gratitude. When we finished the paperwork, he handed me a copy and said, You'll get confirmation within a week. Keep everything in this folder, dates, times, conversations. If it escalates, we'll know exactly where to begin. I thanked him. As I rose to leave, he said something that stayed with me. Evelyn, love and law both need boundaries. One protects the heart, the other protects the truth. Don't be afraid to use both. Driving home, I felt lighter. Not happy, exactly, but grounded. I realized that justice doesn't always wear armor. Sometimes, it wears patience and paperwork. That night, I made myself a simple dinner and called Lena, my friend from book club, to talk about nothing in particular. We laughed about a novel's bad ending, and when I hung up, I realized I hadn't felt lonely that evening. I had felt capable. The next morning, I organized a small corner of my living room into what Marcus called a truth station. I placed my binder there, a calendar, and a notepad for logging any new details. It wasn't a war room, it was a classroom, where I'd remind myself that self-respect starts with documentation. A few days later, Daniel called. Mom, he said, I heard there was a mix-up with that insurance thing. Megan feels terrible. I took a breath. I'm sure she does. Mistakes happen. He sounded relieved. Thanks for understanding. You always do. I smiled into the silence. Understanding isn't the same as forgetting, Daniel, but I do love you. He paused. I know, Mom. After the call, I looked at the folder on the table and thought of Marcus's words. Boundaries don't break love, they define it. I didn't know it yet, but that folder would become my quiet shield for the months ahead, when life decided to repeat the lesson Daniel needed most. Spring came with that deceptive warmth that makes you think everything is fine. The trees in Asheville bloomed early, and the air carried the scent of wet pine. But under that soft season, I could feel tension building like a storm behind polite smiles. Daniel and Megan started calling less again, though I'd learned not to measure love by frequency. Instead, I watched their lives from the edges, seeing patterns form in silence. It began with small requests, Megan asking if I could temporarily store a few boxes of her event supplies in my garage. Then she added her business receipts to my mailing address, for convenience. I said yes, because old habits die slow. Within a month, I had half a garage full of her company's leftover decor. I didn't complain. I simply labeled each box by date and content. It was easier to document than to argue. Around that same time, I heard from Marcus that the insurance provider had confirmed the fraudulent authorization. It's resolved, he said, but you should know your file was accessed again briefly. I thanked him, wrote the date in my log, and felt the quiet weight of repetition. Life was teaching Daniel what he hadn't learned yet, that responsibility can't be borrowed from those who've already paid for it. Meanwhile, Daniel's architecture firm was expanding, and Megan's event business was struggling. She'd lost 2 clients in a row and was covering expenses with credit cards. I knew because she mentioned it during one of her brief calls. It's just a rough patch, she said, laughing lightly, but I heard the tremor under it. When Daniel visited, alone a few days later, I offered tea and asked, "How are you two holding up?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "We're fine, Mom. Megan's stressed, but she'll figure it out. You know her." I nodded. "Yes, I do." By May, the rough patch had turned into a landslide. Through quiet sources, old hospital friends still working at the bank branch, I learned that Daniel and Megan had accumulated $12,600 in credit debt tied to a business account under both their names. They weren't reckless, just proud. They refused to ask for help, even when the edges of their world began to fray. I didn't rush in. I'd done that once, years ago, when Daniel dropped out of college for a semester after Patrick's death. Back then, I had begged, scolded, and sacrificed until he returned. This time, I would not rescue. I would wait, let the weight of consequence do the teaching. Instead, I poured my energy into volunteering again. The local free clinic had an opening for part-time mentorship, guiding young nurses through their first months. I loved it, the smell of antiseptic, the rhythm of measured kindness. Teaching steadied me. It reminded me of what true care looked like, gentle, factual, and never enabling. Weeks passed. Daniel visited once in late June, looking thinner, quieter. "Everything okay?" I asked. He shrugged. "Work's good. Megan's trying to land a big event in Charlotte. It'll fix everything if it goes well." He smiled, but his eyes betrayed fatigue. "Just promise me you're not worried about us." I placed my hand over his. "Daniel, worry and love live in the same house. I've just learned to keep them in separate rooms." He chuckled softly, the boy in him flickering through for a second. But then he left, and I could tell the distance between us was now more than miles. It was pride, stretched thin over fear. By mid-July, another letter arrived, this time from a collection agency. It wasn't addressed to me, but to Daniel and Megan, yet it came to my home again. When I called the number, the agent confirmed my address was listed as their secondary contact. I made notes, dated everything, and quietly filed it in my binder. One evening, while I was tending my small backyard garden, Marcus called. "Evelyn, you sound too calm," he said. I laughed softly. "That's because calm is my weapon," he sighed. "Just remember, patience isn't the same as silence. When the time comes, speak clearly." I promised I would. By late summer, the tension found its breaking point. Megan's big event collapsed when the venue flooded. They lost clients, money, and reputation overnight. Daniel didn't call for 3 weeks. When he finally did, his voice cracked. "Mom," he said, "we need to talk." I said only, "Come home." That night, I sat at my kitchen table and opened my binder. Inside were months of quiet lessons, dates, debts, the forged authorization, the returned mail, the proof of her mistakes, and my decision not to use them until they could serve meaning, not revenge. I stacked everything neatly beside 2 teacups and whispered to the empty room, "Life, it's your turn now. If you've ever loved someone enough to let the world teach them what you couldn't, you'll understand what that moment felt like." It wasn't bitterness, It was Grace wearing its work clothes, ready for the next shift. The knock came just after sunset. When I opened the door, Daniel stood there with his shoulders slumped, Megan beside him, clutching a folder so tight her knuckles had gone pale. Behind them, the porch light cast a long, trembling shadow. I stepped aside and said, "Come in." They followed me quietly to the kitchen, where the 2 teacups I'd set out earlier waited as if they had known. No one spoke at first. Daniel rubbed his forehead, eyes red-rimmed, while Megan stared at the steam rising from her cup. Finally he said, "Mom, we're in trouble." I nodded. "Once. Tell me." His voice shook. Megan's business collapsed. The last event was a disaster, the venue flooded, clients backed out, and now we're in debt. "I don't even know how much we owe anymore," Megan whispered. "It's my fault. I thought I could fix it before it reached this point." I folded my hands. "How much?" Daniel looked at her, and she murmured, "About 12,600. I took a slow breath. "I see." Silence stretched, heavy but not cruel. I could feel their shame filling the space between words. "You came for help," I said softly. "What kind?" Megan hesitated. "We just need a small loan to cover the bills until things recover," Daniel added quickly. "I'll pay you back, every cent." I studied their faces, the same mixture of hope and humiliation I'd seen countless times in my patients when they realized healing required honesty. I reached for the binder beside me, opened it, and began laying out papers one by one. "This," I said, tapping the first page, "is the hospital invoice that came to my address. This one," I added, sliding another forward, "is the email authorization written under my name. And this," I said, lifting the final page, "is the insurance report that confirmed the file was accessed again in May." Their eyes widened. "I'm not angry," I continued calmly. "But you need to see that every shortcut has a receipt." Daniel's face drained of color. "Mom, I didn't know she—" Megan interrupted, her voice cracking. "I thought it was still active. I didn't mean to steal anything." I looked at her, steady but kind. "I believe you. But intent doesn't erase impact. You borrowed more than money. Megan, you borrowed trust." She covered her face with her hands. I turned to Daniel. "You once told me she was your priority, and she should be. That's what marriage means. But priority without responsibility is just preference. You protect what you love by facing the truth, not by avoiding it." He swallowed hard. "So, what do we do now?" I closed the binder and placed my hand on it. "You learn what life tried to teach you through this. You start by calling the bank tomorrow. Consolidate the debt under your own names, not mine. Speak to Marcus, he'll help you create a payment plan. And Megan," I said gently, "you'll rebuild your business only after you balance your books, not before." She looked up, tears streaking her face. "You're not going to help us financially?" I shook my head slowly. "Not this time. I already did years ago when I gave you the kind of foundation that makes a man strong enough to rebuild on his own. If I pay this for you, you'll just miss the lesson life's trying to give." Daniel nodded, his eyes glistening. "You're right." He looked at Megan. "We'll fix this." I smiled faintly. That's the spirit that built every home worth keeping. For a long moment, no one moved. Then I stood, poured more tea, and set the cup gently in front of Megan. "You're still family," I said. "Mistakes don't cancel love, but love without truth doesn't grow." She whispered. "I don't deserve your kindness," I replied. "Kindness isn't about deserving. It's about direction." When they left that night, Daniel hugged me tighter than he had in years. "Thank you," he said softly, "for not yelling." I smiled against his shoulder. "I'm your mother. My job was never to yell, it was to teach." After they drove away, I stood on the porch, listening to the sound of their car fade down the street. The stars were bright that night, the kind that only appear after a storm has cleared the sky. I realized then that some lessons can't be given with words, they have to be lived. And life, ever patient, was finally repeating mine back to my son. The next morning, sunlight poured through the kitchen window, warm and forgiving. I sat at the table sipping coffee when my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel read, "We called the bank. Marcus is meeting us this afternoon." I smiled and whispered, "Good." It was the kind of message a mother hopes for, not asking for rescue, but reporting progress. By the end of that week, Marcus called to update me. "They're taking full responsibility," he said. "Daniel's consolidating the debt into a personal plan. Megan's agreed to close her business temporarily and start part-time work with a catering company. They're steadying themselves." I exhaled, relief spreading through me like warmth after a long winter. "Thank you, Marcus," I said. "I knew they'd learn faster through consequence than comfort." He chuckled. "You always were the quiet teacher." In the weeks that followed, small signs of restoration appeared. Daniel began calling every few days, not out of guilt, but genuine care. "How's your garden, Mom?" he'd ask. I'd tell him about the hydrangeas blooming early, about the robins returning to the yard. He listened the way he used to when he was little, eyes wide, eager to know the world through mine. I didn't mention the binder or the lesson. Those things had already done their work. Megan surprised me one afternoon by stopping by unannounced. She carried a basket of fresh bread from the bakery, where she now worked part-time. "I didn't want to come empty-handed," she said softly. I smiled and invited her in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd once shown her every truth she'd tried to avoid. "How's work?" I asked. "Honest," she said. "Hard, but honest." She looked around the room and added, "I used to think success meant controlling everything. Now, I just want to earn peace." I nodded. "Peace is the only success that lasts." Before she left, she handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for $500 labeled "First Payment." My throat tightened. "You didn't need to rush this," I said. She smiled through tears. "I did. It's the first thing in months that feels right." I hugged her. For the first time, she didn't stiffen. She leaned in fully. As summer turned to fall, Daniel and Megan slowly rebuilt their footing. They moved to a smaller apartment, sold what they didn't need, and began living within what Marcus called the boundaries of earned dignity. I admired them quietly from afar, never interfering. Sometimes, the best thing you can give grown children is the chance to surprise you. One evening, Daniel came by after work. He helped me fix a leaky faucet, something he hadn't done in years. When we were done, he lingered at the door. "Mom," he said, "I think I understand now what you were doing. You weren't trying to punish us." I smiled. "No, Daniel. I was trying to stay out of life's way. It's a much better teacher than I could ever be." He nodded slowly. "You were right. Losing things makes you look at what's real." I touched his cheek the way I used to when he was a boy. Then it wasn't really a loss. It was a return. After he left, I sat on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders, listening to the soft hum of crickets. For the first time in years, I felt peace that didn't need explaining. My home was still small, my days still quiet, but my heart was full. If you've ever had to watch someone learn the hard way while keeping your hands folded, you know it takes strength deeper than anger. Letting life teach is an act of faith, and faith, I've learned, always returns its lessons in kindness. 6 months later, the world had softened again. Autumn leaves painted Asheville in shades of gold and copper, and the air carried the faint chill that signals peace after a long season of storms. I spent my mornings on the porch, a blanket on my lap, and a mug of cinnamon tea in hand, watching the sun rise over the Blue Ridge Hills. Daniel and Megan invited me for dinner one Saturday evening. Their new apartment was modest but full of light, the kind that makes everything seem forgiving. Megan greeted me at the door, her hands still dusted with flour. "Don't laugh," she said. "I tried baking bread again." I smiled. "That's a good sign. Bread means hope." Daniel hugged me tightly, the way he hadn't since his wedding day. "We wanted to show you something," he said, leading me to the living room. On the wall above their dining table hung a framed quote in simple black letters: "Love that costs nothing, teaches nothing." I stood there for a long moment, letting the words settle. Megan said quietly, "We remind ourselves every day, about honesty, about what we almost lost." Daniel added, "You were right, Mom. Life repeated your lesson better than any lecture could." We sat down to eat, laughter filling the small space. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was real. They talked about saving for a house, about Megan's plan to start a smaller event business focused on local clients, about Daniel's new project, designing affordable housing. I listened, proud not of what they had achieved, but of who they had become, people who understood that love is a practice, not a possession. When I left that night, Daniel walked me to the car. The sky was clear, the kind of stillness that feels earned. "Mom," he said, "thank you for not giving up on me." I smiled. You never give up on those who are still learning. You just step back until they see the lesson themselves. Driving home, I thought about Patrick, about the years between loss and grace, and about the circle of love that somehow always returns to its source. Life, I realized, had repeated my lesson not to punish, but to prepare. Thank you for listening. If you've ever had to teach love through patience instead of words, tell me in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to Her Voices. Your voice matters.